it work? Good morning. Welcome from our side, and we hope to energize now the panel a little bit. Without further ado, I would like to ask the co-panelists and panelists to introduce themselves. And then we start with David giving a brief introduction, and we kick off our discussions. We're looking forward to it, and maybe in this room we start, and then to our two panelists.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Thestrup. I am representing Angelini Ventures. I'm an investment director there. Angelini Ventures is a completely new corporate venture fund out of Angelini Industries, which is also Angelini Pharma and Angelini healthcare consumers products. So we are a corporate venture fund investing, so to say, the whole value chain of the businesses under Angelini Industries, but mainly focusing on consumers and healthcare and pharma. It's about 300 million euro evergreen setup, and we try to deploy the cash now over the next 5-6 years in companies both in pharma and digital health, so that's the panel also. Myself, I have a background in neuroscience and engineering, and in venture funds and business development for Ulrich and UCB.
Good morning, welcome. So my name is Guy Spiegelman. I work for Amazon Web Services, and I lead up the work we do at Amazon and Amazon Web Services with healthcare and life science startups across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I'm part of a global team of former investors, medical professionals, and others that are really focused on bringing the best of technology to help healthcare and life science startups grow and thrive, out of a really simple belief that technology today has the power to accelerate time to clinical value, and part of that is data, which we'll talk about today. Before that, I was in an investment fund called Amoon out of Israel, and also led the entrepreneurship program at the Weizmann Institute. And in the past, I was in medical device and healthcare delivery startups. Let's have a great panel.
Thanks. Do we have our panelists also remotely? I don't see them. Yes?
Yeah, we are here.
Fantastic. So I would then hand over to our two gentlemen from the remote.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorenzo Positano. I'm a managing director and partner from Boston Consulting Group Rome office. I lead our healthcare practice in the South Mediterranean area, and I support global healthcare companies across the entire value chain. So starting from pharmaceutical, medtech, payers and provider, and the entire ecosystem that is around, including all the functional topic and data and digital. Looking forward to the discussion today. Good morning again.
Yeah, and hi, Ben Maddison here. Sorry I couldn't be with you today. Unfortunately, couldn't make it. So I lead Stifel Financial's European health tech practice, Stifel being a $7 billion US wealth manager and investment bank, and we focus exclusively on growth companies. And what I do is advise on M&A, private fundraising, public markets and debt. So the full spectrum of investment banking products for companies in the digital health tech arena, and really looking forward to the panel today.
Thank you. David? Yeah, hey, good morning. I hope you are a bit energized after 2 shots of coffee this morning. Also, it's an early time still. My name is David. I'm part of the Merck group, so the German Merck, not the American Merck. People are confusing from time to time. I'm heading commercial operations of the global digital health team. After, looking after strategies and development of digital health, it's time now to look after how do we take it commercially and to the market in a successful way. It's not straightforward, and that's for my focus those days. Really happy to be here and have this great panel with our colleagues. Ulrich?
Thank you, David. Yeah, Ulrich Muehlner, Sales Managing Director, founder of GrowthCube Partners. That's what I'm doing 1% of my time, but 99% of my time I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dog Health, which is a digital health and health tech company digitizing the healthcare professional and patient interface. But I think it's not to talk about us, but more about the topics. I would probably hand over to David to kick it off with a few slides, and then we dive into the discussion.
So I just have a couple, 2 or 3 slides that I would like to share with you just to set the stage. If you can have them on the screens, that would would be helpful.
Speak to the points.
Yeah, maybe I can already start and indeed speak to the point of the slides. So I think that the key message of this morning is really the following. I think if you look at the stages of money that was raised this year for digital health organization and data for pharma organizations and startups. I think 2022, if you look at the first half of the year, and the data I've looked is from Rockers, is a bit in decline versus 21. However, 21 has been a record year. So I think versus 2020, digital health startups are still raising a lot of money, and it's probably, and I was just, I attended an event yesterday evening in Geneva in a private bank, still identifying digital health as one of the big trends in technologies. So I think digital health is still in a good shape despite the slight decline versus the record year of 2021. The trend is there, and it's still a massive area of investment. Now, with that said, digital health is a pretty broad word and can be considered as a buzzword from time to time. So what we are going to talk about today is really the patient care and how do you use big data and digital health, but to improve life, improve patient outcome and patient journey through different type of diseases. Now, digital health is about patient care, yes. It's about decentralized clinical trials, which is going beyond the care. It's going about, we know that those days, and we are all looking about how to reduce the carbon footprint, and we know that remote monitoring, decentralized trials, and all those things that we can do remotely, thanks to digital tools, are definitely contributing to that aspect as well. But it's helping access patients that do not have access of clinics or practitioners, and they can access to health remotely. It's helping through the education of patients, knowing what's the treatment they are going about. So digital health is something that is broad, and that's what we want to address today. So not really the telemedicine type of thing, but really everything is going around and supporting the patient and the interaction with the patient. So with that said, I think we are good without the slides. That was just to set the scene. We know that we have challenges, right? And that's what we want to also discuss today. What are the opportunities and what are the challenges? Like every new topic, every new innovation is full of challenges. The question is, how do we make it happen despite the challenges? And that's what we want to address today. So with that said, Ulrich, back to you.
Thank you, David, despite having the slides that we prepared. Yeah, probably I would.
Slides. Well,
and here are the slides.
Here are the slides. just look at the slides, and try to fit them what David just said. So the panel says pharma and big data revolutionizing patient care. I usually try to start with a general question. So why is data indeed important for pharma? And I'd probably like to give this question to Lorenzo, who is hopefully still remotely joining us, to maybe provide his perspective on this intro question.
Thank you, Ulrich, and good morning again, everybody. So data are fundamental, right, at this point. Let me start from what is the context. I will be super brief. So at the moment, the healthcare system are really struggling with growing complexity and an unsustainable cost increase that are essentially bringing the accelerated demand for fundamental change and transformation. In terms of strain that the healthcare system are actually undergoing, we are seeing, as we said, increasing costs, right? So the healthcare costs, we know that are rising more than the GDP. We see varying quality. So we see multifold variation in outcomes between and within the countries. We have a low patient trust. So patients have low and diminishing trust in the healthcare system, and there are poor patient information. We do have challenges with the healthcare staff. So the healthcare staff are stressed coming out from the COVID pandemic. There is high level of burnout. There is even a challenge in sourcing the healthcare staff. There is actually a decreased efficiency in terms of the productivity of the physician, and as well as an higher admin burden for the healthcare staff to carry over versus the patient visit. And last but not least, there is the clinical research. So there is less government funding to the clinical research, fewer physicians with PhD, fewer patient application, and increase on the production focus rather than on the research. On top of this, we have additional challenges on their way. So we have, the usual change in demographics, in aging, and increase of the chronic disease. We have the consumerization and increase power of patient in choosing and making the decision on what is the best care with them. We have, and is of course the focus of this panel, disruptive technology and biomedical development that is actually that are actually here within the system, and we do have social and geopolitical shifts that are actually increasing the health inequality. In all this environment, having a sustainable healthcare is becoming fundamental. And we are talking about a lot since years about value-based healthcare, but why actually value-based healthcare is important, why the data are important to enable value-based healthcare. So value-based healthcare will actually enable to address the healthcare challenges through enabling innovation that delivers the outcome that matter the most to the patients at the lower cost and across the full cycle of care. This, will be done leveraging data to measure the impact across the full spectrum of the healthcare. And the data here, right? So we do have now established outcome standards to measure the outcome for different disease. We do have explosion of healthcare data. Let me give you just the statistic, right? So the amount of healthcare data, it's incredible. It's actually half of, if we want to measure all the words that have been spoken so far since the beginning of the languages, the amount of healthcare data that we have at the moment is actually half of them, right? So it's an incredible amount of healthcare data. And there are issues about interoperability. So, but we do have actually new interoperability standards that allow the different players to speak about them. And we do have advanced tech and analytics. So the technology are there, the data are there. This will enable essentially a better value-based healthcare, better outcome at the lower cost. So sustaining the entire healthcare system and giving a future and a more sustainable pathway.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Very insightful. Ben, as an investor, what are you looking for when you look at the companies that do work with data as an enabler?
Yeah, thanks. And look, it kind of depends on stage of company, right? And along that journey, you look differently. But I think if we think about companies that are in that scale-up phase, that growth phase, fundamentally, what do we talk to our clients about in the world of big data, in the world of engagement in the pharma setting? It's validation, fundamentally. And if we keep that word in our minds, I think it's really helpful as we build out materials, engage with investors, etc. And clearly the most straightforward validation is financial. If customers are paying for something and increasing that engagement, increasing that wallet, then that's validating in many ways, and it's very straightforward. But often companies are still at an earlier stage than that, of course, when they're speaking with pharma and monetizing and using the data. So, looking at other validation factors like technology, what is the access to the data? What quality of data do you have? Are there early signs of engagement with pharma with end users. That might be a pilot study, that might be a great case study where we're working together, but fundamentally something that says someone in the industry, someone that understands, someone that is an expert is using the data that we have in order to provide outcomes for themselves. The third way we look at it is then to take a step ahead into economic viability, and we think about a lot of propositions, and you mentioned telehealth at the start, and it's a great side example of this, but in the pharma setting of, does the economic model stack up? Does the cost of accessing the data, does the cost of cleaning that data, does the cost of building that into a product set really create a viable model? And I think one of the reasons that technology into the pharma setting has held up stronger from an investment thesis than other areas of healthcare tech is that it's global, is that the total addressable market is that much bigger and transcends borders. And then finally, and I think this is something that we always look for from the investor side when we speak to investors, is if we're engaging with patients, is the product, is the solution used? And it's quite an exposing question at times. You know, how much does this solution get used? How much patient engagement is there with this solution? And often companies struggle to answer that question. And really in healthcare and what we see with the patient lens is it's very hard to get patients to use and engage in a consistent manner. And yet by doing that, you build this kind of data wheel, this snowball effect that adds value. So validation in those settings, I think, is incredibly important. If we're sitting here as a company right now, how do we prove that beyond that financial setting? I think case studies are a fabulous example. I think engaging with customers, customer videos that demonstrate the value and the enthusiasm for a product is really important. Now, if we just pause and think about a couple of the red flags that we might see and what turns investors off, beyond the opposites of those things, I think that a lack of USPs is an area of challenge, in particular in highly competitive markets. So where there's a lot of established players, if you're not providing a highly specialized, differentiated solution, then getting investors to believe that traction is going to be ahead of you is tricky at times. And I think the final one, and this is coming to the point of 2021 versus 2022 in terms of investment year to date, one of the challenges has been marrying valuation expectations. So expectations of the issuer, of the company issuing, say, stock, and that of the investor. And clearly, when we'd seen this contraction in value and valuations over the last 12 months, marrying those two things has become increasingly difficult. So realistic expectations on valuation has become increasingly important in order to get the right type of investor to really lean in on a proposition.
Thank you, but Ben, as an investor, Thomas, anything you want to add?
I was just thinking maybe Ben and I coordinated lists of points, but we didn't. But I fully agree. I mean, validation you mentioned, Ben, is super important. And it's really hard sometimes to see digital health companies coming out and claiming a lot, but did not yet conduct their studies, right? We just really need to have those studies when we look at companies. It's a big red flag if they haven't done it. It's fine if they have a plan to do it and they need a little capital to do them, but then at least show some kind of design and thought of how to get to a point where you can actually show that the service that you have or the product that you provide provides an outcome that you want. So outcome for patients, outcome for caregivers. So that's one super important point. Another point that was mentioned earlier, and I think that was from Lorenzo, was actually also, and I like that, was looking at the caregiver side, because this is also a point where we have to think that there's a need. I mean, we see a lot of interesting companies also supporting caregivers, and this is also something I think we have an interest in. So I just wanted to say that. Maybe also what's important is to think about how the companies generate data, because again, IP around data is tough, but you can always put IP on your algorithms. or you can try to generate a business plan that generates proprietary data. So that's also something that's really important for us. But that data, again, speaking of what is important, has to create value somewhere in the system. And we should also not forget that when we speak to the companies, that it's important, and this is one of Ben's points also, and really engage with the users of the software or the service. It's really important early on, because you cannot just assume that you're going to save the world because you have a smart little app. And this is go out there, engage with the ones that are actually going to use the product, and we would like to see data on that. Right? Something that we can look at and understand that you're actually fitting in a specific workflow. It makes a change for the caregiver that is working with the patients, and for the patient is a benefit also. Faster care, easier care, better management of the care. So that's a topic that we're very interested and focused in. Not so much on data, but a team again, I think is probably going to come up again. But teams are super important also here. I mean, this is a complex ecosystem. There's a lot of regulation. Often, we have super interesting small companies coming up with a smart idea, but they don't have the expertise. They haven't had people working in big pharma on the tech side for many years, and it's really hard to grasp how complex the pharma industry is compared to some tech industries. So when we look at companies as well, it's great to see that the ratio of the management, at least, is in favor of people that have been in the industry for some time, either on pharma or the tech side or in the caregiver healthcare side, because this is really a challenging place to be. So without repeating more of what Ben said also.
Yeah, thanks for the perspective from the investor side. The panel says pharma and big data, but obviously there are other very important players in this space, so the tech players. So Guy, what's your perspective on the space?
Sure, certainly. And of course, as AWS, our customers are big pharma and healthcare systems and digital health companies. And if we think about data that pharma needs, it doesn't just start with patient data. It starts with data coming out of the labs. And there's all sorts of great things happening now to automate how that data gets into a federated data set that allows for research and going forward. But I want to talk about sort of the four main pillars of managing data. And I think it's really important, because this is important if you're a small company or a large pharma. First of all, security compliance. And that's very different in different geographies. Even in Germany, you'll have a different set of rules in Munich and in Berlin. And it's really important to understand that and to manage any personal health information according to the highest standards of compliance. And at AWS, we pride ourselves on meeting those standards across the world and having experts to help you do that. The second part of handling your data is how are you ingesting that data, and how are you storing that data, and how are you making sure it's agile. Because when we talk about healthcare data, you can be talking about imaging data, or you can talk about pathology data, or data coming out of electronic health records if your country has electronic health records, because that's also not something that's standard. Coming from Israel, we're very famous for having longitudinal healthcare data. In parts of Germany or in other parts of Europe, not so much. And so a big challenge out there, and probably an opportunity area, is how are startups going to help countries without legacy digital health data get more data accessible for innovation. So ingesting data can come from all sorts of ways, and then storing it in a very efficient way is also very important. Mentioned before, I think Ben mentioned before, interoperability. Once you have data, how are you going to make sure you can interact with the health system, either when you're ingesting it, or you have a device or a digital health app that you want to send healthcare data back to a medical record so a clinician can have a look at it. And the fourth area that's really important in terms of handling data is how you're setting up your data to maximize and utilize it, let's say for machine learning. So, for example, with AstraZeneca, we did a huge program with them, and they can now run over 51 billion statistical tests in under 24 hours, studying individual mutations of individual genes. That kind of performance that's available through using the cloud was just not available before. And so that's a huge area of opportunity. And I think, you know, that digital health companies are working more with pharma. I think that's because the pharma have the dollars to be able to support those digital health companies as they develop and try and validate themselves. And I think we're seeing that more and more around the world. And at AWS, we support those kind of programs, partnering with Novartis, with AstraZeneca, and the others with their cooperation with digital health startups. So, you know, a message here from us and from the big tech players: we're here to support you. We're here to support you with the power of the cloud, with the power of our professionals who come from the industry, whether that is protecting your data, ingesting your data, or taking advantage of that data.
Thank you, Guy. Ben and Thomas, back to you. What do you think, and I think you touched about it earlier, but what do you see as good data? I mean, data, we know, can come from so many different places, so many different formats, so many different types of data. What for you is good data that will deliver an outcome, that will make an impact at the end on any product?
I can try first. And I'm not a data scientist, so bear with me, but obviously, I mean, we're out to find data that can somehow lead to a decision, and so it should be outcome driven, right? I mean, if you look at pharma, we're interested in biomarkers. We need digital biomarkers. The good thing about digital biomarkers is it's high resolution. You know, we can measure many time points from many different devices at the same time. We can aggregate them. We can even, so I would call that maybe primary data. And we can add all the secondary and tertiary data on top, which, again, depending on you really right, the data is very different in many places. That can bias the data, it can screw the data in ways so we can pick up wrong signals. So you have to bear that in mind, at least when you look at data. But adding sort of primary, secondary, and tertiary data together with, I don't want to say AI, but with machine learning or some kind of way of handling the data in a clever way can really make an impact for the decision you're going to make. I know there are companies that are trying to catch biomarkers. They provide kits for the patients to kind of monitor the disease. So these data are then sent into a system back to the GPs or the healthcare providers. But there in the system, at least you have a tool to add additional data, right? I think it's interesting for instance, in pulmonary disease, where weather, temperature, heights, and so on can have an impact. You can add that data, and then the AIs will tell, well, okay, there is maybe a chance of a patient here to having a problem with breathing today, right? Not because of mismanagement of medication, but because of weather. So you can really blend data here, and I think that's maybe good data, right? I mean, again, we have to be careful because data is many things. So that's at least our perspective. So obviously we wanna find the companies that can pick up the data, manage the data, and sort for the right data, right? Because if you know, when you look at large studies from Truman databases or similar, right, and you start comparing countries in Europe alone, you have to really filter the data a lot, so you lose out a lot of information also, right? So it's yeah, it's not so easy, but yeah, I'll give it on to Ben now.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I wholly agree with that. You know, this idea of good data versus bad data or irrelevant data, I guess. And look, we sit here, and a lot of our propositions we hear from companies starts with, we've got this great access to this data set. This is a huge opportunity with the largest data set for X or Y in the world. Why don't I get full value for that from investors? You know, I should get more value. And the hardest piece for us is not necessarily accessing the data sets in order to bring it together, but it's productizing that and demonstrating that there's value in that and in those data. And that's from being able to clean the data, that's being able to then interpret the data, as Thomas says, and that's fundamentally then being able to sell the data into certain channels. So if we've got a great workflow solution for the hospital setting, and we've got all this data, exhaust data coming out the back of it, but we can't sell that, then fundamentally there's not a huge amount of value in that for our investors and for our company. And so looking about selling that into the right channels, and then fundamentally embedding our solutions into pharma. So what we also see with a number of companies is early stage pilot projects with big pharma, and we think they're great. We think that's super interesting, but then the companies that really succeed and push on then begin to embed themselves in those pharma companies, become absolutely critical solutions to the end user, i.e. must-haves, not nice-to-haves, not a kind of side project, but absolutely fundamental to the offering. And therefore the data has to be highly specific, highly cleaned, highly structured, and provide valuable insights off the back of that.
Thank you, Ben. Lorenzo, from your perspective, I mean, are you aligned with what was just said, or would you have a different perspective?
No, I am fully aligned with what just said. Let me just add a couple of points. The first one, we do have different archetypes or model that exist essentially to monetize the data. So the first one is to be just, I mean, not just, but to be a data capture and resale model. So means collect, clean, and package raw data that are relevant essentially for the customer and can be sold directly or brokered through data resellers. This is, for example, something that Health Verity is actually doing very well. Then the second model is having a comprehensive and curated data set. This means that you have an aggregated data across multiple sources, both primary and secondary, and you can create a new user interface solution to access data and derive new insights. This is, for example, something that a company like Optum or the same IQVIA is actually doing very, very efficiently. The third model is you have a data and analytics enabled decision support, right? So you build a proprietary algorithm to support a specific business application. And there is an option to create front-end user interface or power other solution through API. Then the fourth model is data-enabled service platforms. So scalable, essentially data-enabled services platform that incorporate a mix of online engagement and human interaction. This is something that, for example, company like Clarify or the same Stryker from the medical device is doing. And then last but not the least, you have what we call the proprietary data brain. So proprietary database on longitudinal access, essentially that identify patient data set used to train artificial intelligence or machine learning brain. All of this model has in common, in common a set of capabilities that has to be in place. So essentially, it's important to have a clear vision. So an articulation of the vision of what is required to win in the market with the appropriate oversights. Then it's important to launch what is, in jargon called use cases, right? So really create the value map of the prioritized use cases across, the different businesses and the different functions, right? Then you need to have in place, of course, data and analytics capabilities. So that are required to set up a data inputs on analytic function and all the processes that are needed to launch the use cases. And then you need to have a clear foundation in terms of data governance and organization. So we talk about the data quality and the required data governance and data management or structure to manage this, the data architecture and the tech foundation. So ensure that all the technology and infrastructure, including the platform support, can actually push the rollout, and then the entire data ecosystem, right? So really having a clear strategy for leveraging external and internal data sources.
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. Guy, maybe just to close on this chapter briefly, when you are sitting with Amazon Web Services at a cross-section of all the different big players, so we know that we have data privacy issues, we know that companies are hesitating in sharing their data. and hosting becomes more and more challenging because countries don't want the data to quit their country. So how do you address that at AWS?
Absolutely, and for us, sort of data privacy, security, compliance is job zero. We wouldn't be in business if we couldn't ensure the privacy of people's data. And something I like to explain, it's all your data is in AWS. So if you think of AWS like infrastructure, like a bridge, okay, and the data is some fruit, okay. There's a truck. That's the startup that has the data, or the hospital has the data. The truck is going across the AWS bridge. So the connection between the bridge and the fruit inside that truck is almost non-existent, right? We're providing a way for companies, whether they're small companies, large companies, to manage, store, and share their data according to their local regulation and compliance. And it's super important that when you build a data set, either on-prem or in the cloud, that you manage it to the highest expectations of security and compliance. And we're here to support you to do that. I think, something that is not talked about enough is, and I think, what's a good data set? I think, and I mentioned this before, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of data out there that we can't access, and that is not being used for research and for innovation. Let's take an example of oncology notes, okay? If anyone's seen oncology notes, they're very highly unstructured reams of text, right? And so if you want to you talked about clinical trials, someone talked about clinical trials before, and let's say decentralizing clinical trials, or maybe making them faster. One of the biggest problems in clinical trials today is patient selection. Okay? How do you select patients for a clinical trial? You need to rely on data. Now, if all your data is in free-form text written by oncologists, how are you going to find patients for inclusion and exclusion? What happens today is that nurses and sometimes even doctors have to sit there, patient after patient, and every 2 or 3 hours they might find one patient that can get into a clinical trial. Well, with natural language processing, okay, and technologies like Comprehend Medical, which we have, and there are other services as well, you can now convert all of that text, free text, into structured data in milliseconds. And so a process that might have taken 3 or 4 weeks to find 100 patients for a clinical trial can now take 2 hours. And I think that's the opportunity. We talk about what's good data. Good data is data that you can search, that you can utilize, and of course it's private. But and like I said before, and I want to come back to this point, we're an infrastructure play and a service play. The data that you store with AWS, that's your data, and it's stored securely and in a compliant way. But on the other side of things, I think we all have a job in this room and in the industry to make sure that as much clinical data is available for research and for innovation as possible, because that's the way we're going to fasten time to clinical value.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the perspective. I would probably build on that and ask Ben and Thomas to kind of bring us towards the future, so to say. I mean, I think we spoke a lot about where we are today, what are challenges, what are requirements, but maybe we can fast forward a little bit. Say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how would you like to see the industry? How would you like to see the use of data, and what is required to get there? So to say, from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think of all these cartoons that we always do to show the patient journey, right? But I think maybe from our perspective, since Angelini Industries is a conglomerate of multiple companies, and the two that's sort of mostly related to what we do is the pharma business and the consumer healthcare business. So I think what we're trying to do is build this journey that allows the patients before, maybe even the prevention step, right? But before you get sick, to be aware of your health. So we were looking at building maybe platforms that can support healthy aging, something that can support your early stage of life, so that's mother and baby perspective. How do we make sure that you have a good start in your life and keep healthy? So that's sort of using data, using tools that will be available hopefully soon to care for people early on and also in the later age. But once you get sick, we want to make sure that we funnel gently in to manage your own disease, and if that's not possible, bring you to a caregiver, right? And this is sort of what we envision, that we try to build this ecosystem around the individuals, but at any time you have the right tool, the right service to empower you to stay healthy. Right? So, and again, it's many different types of services along the journey. It's a lot of different types of data sets, and the question is also, when can you start measuring? When is it a good time to measure? How do you do with babies? How do you do with mothers? But this is something that we're striving to do, and one thing is for certain, that we believe that the industry is going to be digital all the way, right? And it has to be, because other industries has taken that journey, and we're sort of still lacking somewhat behind. It's getting much better, and COVID, I guess, as everyone has said many times, accelerated this hugely. But this is the journey we like to build, and these are the companies that we're looking for that can sort of be the one providing that service along that journey. So that's what we're trying to build for. That's what we're looking for, at least. Hand over to Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. From our perspective, I think it's almost the ecosystem within which pharma is operating and the shifting tides there, which is going to drive behaviors. And what Lorenzo was saying right up front around value-based care, I think, is absolutely critical in this movement. And fundamentally, pharma companies, to our mind, are going to focus on two core things: accelerating and making more efficient drug development, and then ensuring that we maximize commercial success of any drug that's approved and any solution that's approved. We still think that will be the modus operandi. But because of this shift, and we do believe it's a shift that is here to fundamentally stay and accelerate towards outcome-based care, towards being more efficient, more economically efficient, I think behaviors will and have already and will continue to change. And I think that one of the key areas around that is going to be this idea of personalized medicine, around precision medicine, and really bringing the right drug to the right patient at the right time. And data can be a huge enabler for that. And I think when pharma unlocks the power of the data, to someone's point here around we're only scratching the surface of what data we can even access, I think that's where there's going to be the fundamental focus over the next years. What does that mean from an earlier company perspective that's thinking about partnering or potentially even being acquired by large pharma companies with their solutions? I think initially we see companies that will work with pharma as partners, and we feel it's a little bit of a stretch that pharma will become big tech players. I think that is a big leap to really succeed in that completely different fundamental skill set. But by partnering with a number of companies, as we see, and then for those that are most critical, those that drive embedded value in the pharma, then those are the ones that are acquired, and we can see them acquired at very, very high multiples. And so producing solutions that, from a company perspective, that become embedded in a pharma company's value proposition is going to be important. And I think that proposition is going to fundamentally focus around value-based care and more outcomes focused than it did in the past.
Thank you. So let's test the energy level in the room. Are there any questions or comments from the audience?
Yes.
Hello. Good morning. Very good and interesting discussion. Maybe a provocative one. I do think potentially that for data we do need a new business model, because as a pharma industry and biotech, we think that we try to be patient-centric, but we see patients as customer and not as a stakeholder, as an asset. And in order to get more buy-in into sharing data, because the more data you have, the signal to noise ratio will improve. So by considering healthy plus patients as stakeholders, maybe there is a way to achieve better results in the future. What do you think about the current business model versus creating value with data?
So who wants to take this question? Maybe Pia and Thomas?
So if I want to understand the question, is how are we turning patients into partners in this journey? Is that where you're going?
Well, yes, because you know, if I go back and think about the microarray, you know, the issue in the beginning was you couldn't compare data because there was no standards, and we are seeing these kind of things as well in metabolomics, genomics, and all the data we collect. They are called nicely big data, but they remain data. So the question is, how you turn data into information and to knowledge? And we are not that good yet. And as you guys said, we are missing many data, but people are not willing to share their own data.
So I think what you're seeing in national biobank projects and across the world, actually, you're seeing in the UK Biobank, Ireland, in Canada, and in different parts, there are patients that are very willing to share their data for the benefit of research and innovation. And study after study shows this. Again, not necessarily in certain parts of Europe, but in many parts of the world, time and time and again, patients are willing to say, if my healthcare data, my omics data, and that can be any sort of omics data, is going to contribute to developing new cures and helping advance medicine, they're willing to do that for no cost. In fact, if you ask them, if you offer them to pay them, they'll start to get suspect, right? So it's sort of counterintuitive, but not when you start to think about it, it isn't. So I think that we're underestimating what people are willing to share. I think people understand that I might one day, you know, God forbid, have some sort of rare disease, and I'm going to be reliant on my fellow humans for their data in order to help me get a solution to my disease. And so people are willing to share their data. But what I think we're seeing is this total difference between different countries and different regions. And I think that's going to impact the level of innovation that you're seeing in different countries. It's not by chance that you have more than 2,000 healthcare life science startups in a small country like Israel, healthcare life science startups. It's because they have access to good data. And I think that markets that want to compete and that want to have healthy, thriving ecosystems that are developing new solutions are going to have to get their head around how we're going to work to securely make this data available for the benefit of advancing medicine.
Maybe just add to it, I fully agree. One part is a culture thing. I mean, like Israel, Denmark, where I'm from, we do share a lot of data. We have one common login for everything we do in our lives, that's including access to our health database, or health records, and those are readily accessible by the doctors, by companies. The companies can apply to gain access to these data. And most people, when asked, are very willing to share this. So I think really it depends on where you're in the world and how you see sharing data. And I think that's a storytelling also we need to be better at, to understand and what happens when you give your data to a pharma company or to a company. That's certainly one part that has to change. And I think also it's a slow adoption, right? It's also a generation thing. I think from my perspective, more and more using apps to track health, it can be small things, but it adds to it, right? So over time, people will just be familiar with having an app where they have their health records stored, where they collect data from their Apple Watches. We already do that without even knowing it really, right? If you have an Apple Watch, it's already tracking you a lot, and you can go in the app and see. So you have the data there. So now you just have to make it valuable, get it to work. And I think that's a transition. We're not there yet, but it will happen. Maybe not right now, but over the next 10 years. I think that will happen, and I think that will be hugely beneficial for everyone. But I don't have a solution right now.
And maybe, thanks, Thomas and Guy. I mean, Ulrich, may I add something, or can you hear me?
Sorry, I wasn't sure who was speaking, but sure. What's the time? 1 minute? Okay, yeah. If you can maybe brief.
Yeah, 30 seconds, right? I mean, this is becoming a digital ecosystem play, right? And we are a bit the testimony on what does it mean, this digital ecosystem play, right? So we do have here around the table people from technology giants, pharmaceutical company, consultancy company, investors, and this is what it is in the reality, right? So to make this work, you do need to have different capabilities and different players around that, each bringing its own area of strength. The challenge at the moment is that everyone wants to play the orchestrator, right? So there is a bit of misalignment on who should be the orchestrator and misalignment of incentives. I think to make this work, right, to make really the best use of data and deliver the best care to the patient, it has to be clear who can play this role and what are the incentives for everybody, and I mean, how can you contribute with the different capabilities to the different digital ecosystem play.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Is there any last question? Otherwise, I will just wrap up this great session. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone in the panel and my co-chair, Ulrich. I think that if I look at what was shared here on the panel, I think one thing is clear is that the direction is that data is there and we need more data, but qualitative data to really create an impact and deliver value-based actions and insights. This is not an easy task, but there are good tech providers that are here to help the healthcare organizations to do so. I think we are also moving, and the role of each of those stakeholders will have to be fine-tuned and defined, but towards more preventive medicine as well, where we'll be able, thanks to this data and AI and all those advanced technologies, to prevent, understand, and act before we got sick. And one thing is clear: there are so many stakeholders in all this game that the what's in it for me needs to be really clear, including for the patient. Right? Patients wonder: do I share data? I don't share data, and as I said, it depends on the country and the culture. But if you explain to patients what's the benefit for him, right? If he shares the data. Then I think that's also going to happen, because that's not always clear to them. So I think that the future looks quite bright for digital health. It's definitely a revolution or an evolution those days. I mean, we are still, I think, figuring out what's the right recipe to make it work and to make it very successful. But definitely, I think the direction is there, and patients deserve it. So let's all continue to add a little bit of contribution to the big part of it and make it happen. Thank you very much.